Welcome to Energy Connection and Courage at Work. We're glad you're back with us. I'm Rebecca Johnson, and I'm actually here with two people today. One of them you've met, my friend and business partner,
Natalie Johnson.
Hey, Natalie. And we are here also with a second person who you're going to get to meet in a minute. So today we're shifting our conversation from energy to connection because as human beings, we are all hardwired for connection and we're frequently doing things that disconnect us from other people. That's a challenge in our personal lives, but it's definitely a challenge in the workplace because genuine human connection is the key to all of the things we want in the workplace. Collaboration, innovation, problem solving, navigating change, resolving conflicts, high engagement, you name it, connection is the key. And without it, we get the opposite. We get friction and confusion and underperformance, or worse, we get drama and toxicity. So for this conversation on connection, we're excited to have a guest with us today, and Natalie's going to introduce you all to him.
So I'm super excited today to introduce Todd Creneti. Todd is on our team, and he's an organizational development and culture expert and also has a background in sport that I'm sure he'll bring up a little bit. You know, I want to say Todd joined our team about a year ago, but I feel like he kind of sort of started working with us a few years before that. And I know Todd personally because Todd and I have this opportunity where our children went to the same school. And when our kids were at that school, he was a very successful head football coach. And my husband does some assistant coaching, and my son played football for a little while. But I kept running into people, and I actually can't even remember the specifics. I just remember, like, over the years in being at school, different people would come up to me at different times, and we'd be talking about the work that I do. And they would say, have you ever met Todd Creneti? You really need to talk to Todd Creneti. And it happened enough that I think, and Todd, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think eventually I reached out to Todd, maybe through LinkedIn or something, and we started connecting. And I think the one thing that does stand out to me with more detail is during that time where people were saying periodically, boy, have you ever met Todd Creneti? My husband said to me, I think maybe you should talk to Todd Creneti. And what my husband said that really stood out was he really connects to the kids on the team. The kids love him. And so as a mom of boys, that really stood out to me. And so Todd is here to talk to us today about connection. And he has a lot of professional experience in this area, both in sport and with organizations. And so Todd, welcome. I'm going to, first off, allow you to, add anything that you'd like to add. Specifically, what we're wondering is, in the workplace, what are some of the things that we do that disconnect us from each other and undermine our ability to work well together? And certainly you could talk a little bit more. I said a lot there, a big mouthful, but you can talk a little bit more about yourself before you jump in.
I think you did a great job, Nat, introducing me, and it's fun to be on here with a couple of my favorite people, talking about some of my favorite things. And, the coaching experience, the building organization experience, through the years has always, to me, landed on one thing, and that's the ability to connect in a meaningful way and build relationships that are meaningful to everybody else. And, the challenge is, as when we sort of tab ourselves as leaders, or we've been tabbed by other people as a leader, and we're on that track, we have this bias towards action to constantly be doing, to try and initiate, to try and create. And while that's important, when it comes to connection, sometimes that's not as successful a strategy. And one of the things that I found, especially through my years of sort of going into programs that were really struggling and trying to reboot them and give them sort of a new identity, if you will. If you go in expecting, hey, if I do this, I'm going to get all of these things, but you spend no time learning about the organization, learning about the individuals, the culture building is not very successful. I think this bias towards action sometimes leads us to do more when we should be listening, when we should be observing, when we should be learning about the people in these organizations and really understanding what's happening there and understanding how to meet their needs instead of telling them what we think they need. And that desire, I think, to be a doer in some cases leads us down a road of wanting to do something, wanting to execute a plan without really spending enough time listening to understand the environment.
I love how you said that, Todd, especially around, we always think that we need this bias towards action. And it's so true in so many cases, especially when we're introduced to new teams. We have these, just as human beings, these thoughts of, I need to show up and prove, I need to perfect, I need to perform. And I think what I'm hearing you say is, that's not really how to connect, though.
No, and I would say, I'm thinking about my very first opportunity to be a head coach when I was in Melbourne on the east coast of Florida, and the program was in some distress. It had some problems with the state, and I was convinced that I was the solution, that I would walk in, everything would turn around immediately, and that it would be easy because I was confident in my ability to do and to build. And yet there were so many nuances to that situation, and there are nuances to every situation. And there were people who were struggling to learn how to trust, and people who felt like they'd been burnt along the way. That without me taking the time to understand that we were never going to make change, I probably lost the first 12 months of that sort of engagement, trying to basically do what you said to prove that I had what it took to change the culture, instead of saying, okay, how can we change the culture? And how can I meet the needs of the people in this organization so they can feel comfortable with that change over time?
As you're talking, I'm realizing it's such a difficult thing to do, especially in some circumstances, which I think might be similar to what you did in Melbourne, is they're actually asking you to come and prove yourself and tell us what you got and how can you help us? And so it's like this wide open space of prove, perfect, perform, tell us. But I think what we have learned as professionals in this field is, that some of that is necessary, but that's not where that true authentic connection comes in. And it takes some real intentionality around not proving, perfecting, and that bias to action that happens. And so if that's not necessarily what creates that real authentic connection with other people, what are some specific things that you've experienced personally or seen in the work that you do that we should be focusing on instead? So I've heard you say listening, but what else is there that we could be focusing on instead around connection?
I think connection always starts with trust. That without creating trust, without demonstrating that we're trustworthy, we can't expect people to want to connect to us if we're sort of moving in the shadows, or we're sort of distant about our intentions or unclear about our intentions. I think it really makes it difficult for other people to want to connect. So building in an environment that's based on trust, giving people the freedom to say things, even things that are difficult for us to hear, so they can move past those challenges. But being a great listener, I go all the way back to the Stephen Covey. We have, 2 ears and one mouth for a reason, and we should be listening twice as much as we talk. That's just such a great reminder to find ourselves in places where we can observe, learn, and interact in ways that are building trust and creating a greater connection through trust. And again, instead of trying to sell people on an idea of, hey, this is what you need, when we give people the time and the space to be comfortable and to share, they'll tell us what they need to be successful. And instead of us going in like doctors with a notepad ready to diagnose, we can invite them into a relationship that allows us to understand their need and better meet that need.
Todd, I want to jump on that for a minute because it's probably like maybe one of the greatest learnings of my life over the past few years has been around this idea that you're talking about with listening well and asking good questions. And I do find that when I can get out of, let me demonstrate that I'm the expert in advice giving mode, and I can just listen with the intention to understand and ask some good questions, the connection that happens between me and that other person is so great. And because people love to be understood, right? And also, I learned something that helps, me or us as a team know how to be more valuable to them, right? Like when we're listening and asking good questions, it not only creates sort of immediate connection, but it helps us learn what we need to learn to be valuable. We can't, to your point, go in and know, many of our clients will come to us and they say, we have this problem and we want you to recommend what to do. And it's really tempting to start the conversation that way, but we're finding that we always have to back up and say, before we can get to that point, we'd love to do discovery. And what we do in discovery is just listening and asking good questions. And I guess I also realized that that's actually an easier way to be in life. It's hard to feel like you have to know all the answers. And it's actually an easier, more relaxed way to be, to remember that your main job is just to listen and ask good questions, because it relieves the pressure of having to prove or be the expert.
Well, and I think a lot of us, we do similar work in that there are times where we feel like we have to be on all the time. And again, that sort of that mindset that, oh, I've got to be on, it means I have to be doing, I have to be doing, I have to be doing. And if we can get our mind to switch from doing to collecting, at least in the beginning, and just trying to understand, I think it takes the pressure off of us. But it also, as a leader, if I'm really being honest, my goal is to make the people around me better. And I think there's a really clear line for me between people who want to be in charge and people who want to lead. People want to be in charge. That's the older sibling. Parents lead. They just want to tell the younger sibling what to do and how it's going to be. And while there are people who function like that in the real world as leaders, I think it's got to be difficult. And so I want to be in a relationship with people. I want to be leading in a way that's helping them get better, grow, improve, and then recognize the influence ultimately on their own, so that they come back. They want more input because there's trust there, and there's a relationship around more than just what I need to get out of that person. It's a relationship about what makes us all better, and a conversation that continues.
Rebecca, I love what you said. In some ways, it's easier to take the pressure off yourself, and that you don't need to show up and you don't need to be the person that knows it all. And then I heard complimentary from Todd, remembering why you're there. You're there to support them, to allow them to grow, not necessarily shine the light on yourself. And so I know for me, even though, Rebecca said it's easier in some ways, I'm in my head going, no, it's not. It's not easy. I like to talk. I like to talk, but it really is. And I think what impacts me most around being able to view and accept that, take the pressure off. You don't need to know all the answers. You don't have to. What can take the pressure off of me, or where I can really step into that space of be a good listener, be here to support them, ask the right questions, intentionally listen, is what my energy is in the moment. In other words, when I am back to back to back meetings and I am not getting a lot of work done, and I have work and personal life things coming in and lots of interruptions, and then I have this opportunity to connect with someone or something that's very important to me, I don't do a good job of it. I sometimes don't even and I get in this mentality of let's get this over with. Let me say what I need to say and get out, as opposed to remembering to step into the shoes of support them. You don't need to perfect, improve, listen. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And I think the challenge sometimes is, hey, I've got a whole list of things I need to get done today. I've got a whole series of meetings, conversations I need to have. Here's what I need out of each one of these conversations or one of these encounters. And if what we need is driving the conversation too much, we find ourselves hunting for that or the right opportunity, or laying in wait, waiting for them to say something that gives me space to speak what I need to say into that moment. And so what I'm finding is becoming helpful, and I think it's easier as I get older, is regardless of the scenario that I'm walking into, focusing first on being present and trying to understand what's happening in that moment. In my mind, this meeting might be very clear and we need to cover these three things, but what's happening with the other people on the call? What's happening with the other people in the room? What happened in the last 48 hours that might affect where they're coming from? Because if we're going to focus on connection, our hit list of things we'd like to get done may change if a need surfaces that needs to be addressed more readily than what maybe I had scheduled for this call. And so I like to think of it almost like a detective, as being so present that I'm trying to constantly understand what's really necessary in that moment and what's really going to be beneficial long term in that moment. And I don't mind sort of flying by the seat of my pants in that way. That is not comfortable for everybody. But for me, it just reminds me to be present, to be aware, to be listening, and to focus more on meeting the needs of others than my own.
I am really hearing that the connection that the two of you guys are making is that in order to be present and connected with people, our physical, mental, and emotional energy has to be Like when we're depleted or overwhelmed, it's very hard to be connected. So it's another reason why a lot of the work we do starts with energy. It's because I have to know how to regulate myself physically, mentally, and emotionally in order to show up in the moment, to be present and to be connected. And if I'm not doing a good job of regulating and recovering my own energy, I just can't show up in a way. I'm going to naturally disconnect myself from other people. One of the things we do in this podcast and in our work in general, as you know, is we work in the intersection of energy, connection, and courage. And they're all always influencing each other. I think we've talked about the relationship just now between energy and connection. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the relationship between connection and courage. This isn't a question I've ever asked you or that we've ever talked about. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
As somebody who is a doer, as a leader, is driven to invite somebody else into steering our boat, it requires a tremendous amount of courage. And so if we are going to be connected in a meaningful way, we have to allow other people to have a voice, to have a role, to take on maybe some work that be more comfortable getting done ourselves at times. And so that extension of trust leads to connection, but it requires some courage. I mean, how many of us have had a day where like, I'd love an extra set of hands, but really this will go faster if I just do it all myself. To invite people into that sort of shaping of a message or working with a client or giving somebody the opportunity when we feel like we're pretty locked in to say, I see this a little differently. I feel a little differently about it. It can make us better in the long run, but it also upsets our apple cart to some degree. And we've got to be okay with that. And that takes some courage that I think is challenging when we're trying to stay on task, on schedule, and moving forward.
I hate an upset apple cart, let me tell you. It is my least favorite. And it really does take courage because courage requires that you kind of sit in the vulnerable moment, no matter what it is, and navigate your way through it without any idea of what the outcome is going to be. So Todd, we do at the end of every podcast what we call a one big thing. And the one big thing is, all right, we've talked about a lot in the last 15 or 20 minutes. If you could give our audience one idea to consider, one practice to laser in on, I'm imagining you could come up with a lot of them, but what would be your one big thing for our listeners today? Short and sweet.
And I think that for those of us who constantly want to do and make an impact by doing, that we need to be able to allow the doing sometimes to really just be listening and by observing and watching, not trying to execute any particular goal of ours, but to just be present enough to understand what's happening in the room to lead more effectively.
And not easy to do. But I love that we had this conversation today, because I think personally for me, it helps me to recognize more often when this is not all about high performance and efficiency. I'm very much, how do we get there quick? How do we get there efficiently? And that does not create connection. Although sometimes important, it doesn't create connection. So thank you, Todd. We appreciate you being here with us today. One of the things that we try to do, Todd, the last thing of each podcast is to share, Rebecca calls it our secrets, but I think I'll call it something unique or quirky about ourselves. And so I'm going to open it up to you and Rebecca. If you have anything that you would like to share today that's unique, maybe something that people don't know about you.
Natalie, have I shared about my new obsession with birds yet?
So many times, but I don't think we've done it on the podcast.
Not on this podcast. No, I'm like real. Okay, so this is why I'm like obsessed with birds. Recently, I have 2 bird feeders that are right outside my office windows, and I even have a bird book on my desk. And the reason that I can't remember if I've shared that on this podcast or not is because I'm talking out loud. Natalie and I are in meetings a lot together, so I think I've shared this in every other meeting. But podcast listeners, I am officially a bird nerd.
To the point of, we'll see her on a Zoom and she's not looking at us anymore. She's looking off to the side. She's like, wait, there's a cardinal. There's a cardinal.
That's a big deal. Cardinals and state bird of Virginia, my home. We love that. So I'm a foodie, like in a big way. And I can be, snooty, but I love to cook and all things food. But my lifelong surge has been for the very best fried chicken, right? Nothing fancy. I have this love and connection to fried chicken for some reason. In fact, I have a T-shirt that says "Fried chicken is my spirit animal." It's a pretty big deal in my life. My immediate family knows that, but it stays pretty close to the chest.
I love that one, Todd. I might be able to help with that one. I know of secret recipes for fried chicken, and yeah, that's a good one.
I am wide open for good fried chicken experiences.
Well, I think I've changed my mind about what I'm going to share, because after Beck shared obsession with birds, I think I'll just share what I'm obsessed with right now. But I am obsessed with Barbara Streisand. And here's why. I heard on the radio some people talking about Barbara Streisand's new biography, and that they were listening to it on Audible, and she reads it herself, and they kept updating each other. I thought, gosh, like Barbara Streisand, she has a beautiful voice. I'm going to listen to it. I'm listening to it on Audible. I've been listening to it for months. It's the longest book I've ever read, and it is amazing. It's amazing. I'm still listening. I was listening to it again this morning. I want to say it's probably close to 30 hours long. So I'm listening to it, but it's her reading it. It's her feelings. It's her singing. She adds her own commentary. I'm obsessed. I love you, Barbara. If you're listening.
Barbara Streisand is timeless. Never goes out of style.
As is fried chicken and birds, right? So Barbara Streisand, birds, and fried chicken. That's how we end today. Todd, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody, we'll see you back next time.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.